more, as we used to, is printouts of the GIS reports. We only want them electronically. Okay, so let's move along. Next page, Caitlin.
So this is just a review of the compliance exemptions and variations that apply for your 2016 filing. Again, we still have the pre-June 28th, 2013 minimum standards bifurcation for solar carve-out 1. So there are two different minimum standards that apply to load that was signed up prior to June 28th, 2013, and another minimum standard that's assigned to load after that date. So you will find that in the filing about how much you have to enter and what is still applicable. There's also still the pre-April 25th, 2014 minimum standard exemption for solar carve-out 2. So any load that was signed up prior to April 25th, 2014, you do not have a solar carve-out 2 minimum standard applied to that load. Any load that was signed up after that, any contracts after that date, you do have the minimum standard that is applicable. And just a note, this is not something that will apply to your 2016 compliance filing, but we do ask for information about contracts that were signed prior to May 8th, 2016 and after May 8th, 2016. You'll find this in Table 3C in the workbook. So again, this doesn't apply for 2016, but it will begin to apply for 2017. We're asking you to provide this information this year so that we have a better idea of what's happening in the market, and then we can then provide you that same information about how much load is applicable under the two different minimum standards that apply for that year.
And I should mention before we move on that after this slide presentation, we're going to move into the filing forms themselves. So what was just talked about is on tabs 2 and 3 of the workbook, but we'll be going there after the slide presentation.
So just a couple reminders about compliance strategies and best practices, specifically in regards to any auction certificates that you may still have for the SREC auctions. So there are limitations on how long you can use them for. So for SREC 1 auction certificates, the 2013 vintage certificates and the 2014 vintage certificates, if you have any auction certificates from 2013 or 2014 still in your accounts, you have to use them this year. They will not be eligible for use beyond 2016. If you have any 2015 auction certificates, you can use them for this year or for next year, for 2016 or 2017. There are also SREC 2 auction certificates that are available that you may have. If you have vintage 2015 SREC 2 auction certificates, you can also use those for either 2016 or 2017. If you have any auction certificates for use in 2017 that you're not going to use this year, but for next year's compliance filing, those should remain in your main GIS account or your bank account. Don't put them into a state-specific sub-account. And then for the compliance workbook, don't list auction certificates or either the SREC 1 or the SREC 2 auction certificates in the banked columns, because those are not technically your bank certificates. They're a different class.
The bank certificates are the ones that were on those those emails in late April. If this is your first year filing, of course, you don't have anything banked from before. Moving on to some compliance strategies and best practices, and we're back at banking. We recommend that you use banking whenever possible. It's and especially use up the ones that are going to expire after this year. There are not a lot of them, but use them up. Don't let them just expire unused. And note that we've got what certificates that can be banked are those that are in excess of your compliance obligation for the year. And there's a limit, namely that if you've got surplus class 1 certificates, you're limited to no more than 30% of your compliance obligation in Class 1 for the year. So if your load obligation is 1,000 megawatt hours, and your Class 1 obligation is, let's keep it simple, is 11% of that, so that comes to 11 Class 1 RECs. And if you happen, and 1/3 of that would be rounded up to 4, I think. So if you happen to have five Class 1 RECs altogether, one of them will be, you'll just lose. You'll have more than you can. Oh no, that's not correct. If you have 5, then you've got 1 to bank. But if you've got 10 of them, and your obligation was 4, and 1/3 of that, 30% of that would round up to 2. So you can bank at the most 2 of them. So you'll have some extra that you can't bank. Well, we'll see that when we go through the slide sets. But each of the classes has a different limitation on how much you can bank based on a percentage of the compliance obligation. Not the load not the retail sales, not the retail load obligation, but the compliance obligation. The other big thing is that all the certificates that you're planning to use for 2016 compliance, including those that you know are surplus, must be settled in your Massachusetts subaccounts of the NEPL GIS before midnight on June 15th. If you have any that cannot be settled there, if you have unsettled certificates or others that are not coded properly, or for some reason you have to put them in reserve, you can do it. You can use them for compliance, but it creates accounting issues. You'll be required to provide additional documentation, and it's more difficult for us to reconcile the numbers from all the filings. So get your certificates settled before the close of the trading year, and just remember that if there are reminted SRECs, reminted SREC 2s that you're not planning to use for that are eligible for, beyond 2016, and you're not planning to use them for 2016, those do not go into the state sub-account. They stay in your banked account because you don't want them submitted with the filing. But anything you do want banked comes in with the filing. Anything that's surplus, that's not one of these auction SRECs that has an extended life beyond 2016, those don't need to come in with the filing to be used next year. And remember, except for those, there's no banking. There is no banking between years at the GIS. The only thing that survives in the GIS from one year to the next are reminted SRECs, reminted auction SRECs and SREC 2s that have a lifespan that takes them beyond the compliance year. ACP payments must be made to the Mass Clean Energy Center by Tuesday, June 27th. It's not that they won't accept them by the 28th, on the 28th or the 29th, but you might not get your receipts on time. And note that there's a new tab in the workbook at the very end called tab N for notification. That tab provides instructions for wire transfers of ACPs to the to this Mass CEC, and it also provides the notification form for the CEC. It used to be that you'd have to go through additional steps in this ACP process, but now we've simplified it by taking this notification function into our workbook, and it'll show you how much, based on an earlier tab in the workbook. It'll show you what your ACP is for each of the classes, and it'll show that to the NEPL, to the Mass CEC. So when your wired ACP payment comes in, they'll know how to divvy up the dollars among those different classes, and they give you the right receipts. The receipts come back to get forwarded by you to the come back to DOER as part of your emailed filing only. Don't bother printing them, just forward them here after you get them. Hopefully you get them by July 3rd and send them along with your filing. If they don't quite get to you by July 3rd, then get your filing in anyway, July 3rd. That's a deadline. And then you can email forward the receipts as soon as you get them. Now, 2016 SREC auctions.
So like previous auctions, the 2016 auctions will be held before the end of July of this year. We do expect a significant volume in the SREC 2 auction. We'll likely have an SREC 1 auction, but we don't expect that much of a volume for that one. And as a reminder, all deposits have to be made into the auction account by June 15th. We do have 2 separate auction accounts, one for SREC 1 and one for SREC 2. And then you'll need to register by submitting a qualification form to our auction agent, ENERNOC, and we'll be providing the information and the paperwork for registering shortly within the next couple weeks. So like with previous auctions, we expect considerable bidder interest. We strongly encourage all retail suppliers to actively participate in this year's auction, specifically in the SREC 2 auction. As I said, we are expecting a large volume, perhaps this historic volume in the SREC 2 auction this year. The way that the auction works and the minimum standard calculation works, if it goes to the 3rd round, we'll see a massive undersupply in the SREC 2 market, potentially because of the doubling of the SREC auction volume in the minimum standard calculation. So again, we highly encourage retail suppliers to participate and to take note of the auction. It does represent an opportunity for retail suppliers to reduce future compliance costs by participating in the auction.
Yeah, and I would just second that too. I mean, I think there's been some historical lessons, I think, learned from how the SREC 1 auction played out a few years back, where there was approximately, I don't know, it was over 100,000 SRECs deposited into that auction account, I think 130,000 or so. And it went to the 3rd round, resulting in a 260,000 megawatt hour increase to the minimum standard, or to the compliance obligation and minimum standard a year after that. So the same dynamic applies here. While SREC 2 prices might be low right now, and might continue to stay low if the auction does clear in the 1st or 2nd round, if it does not clear in those first 2 rounds and it goes to that 3rd round, then you're talking about a situation where you could see an increase of an additional 250 to 300,000 megawatt hours in the SREC 2 compliance obligation, which could have major impacts on the pricing. So I think this is something that we are watching out for. I recognize that sometimes not all the price signals are there to show that beforehand. I think we'll do our best to show what the minimum standard will be with or without it going to the 3rd round, so that people can price that out accordingly and see the potential market impact. But we do strongly encourage people to participate.
Thank you, Mike. One other thing before we move on, I forgot to mention at the beginning that if you have questions, there's a box over on the right-hand side for you to type in your questions, and we'll get to them. We'll pause after the slide presentation before we go through the filing forms to take some of those questions. Okay, next is...
So just to provide kind of an update on ongoing rulemakings that we have in the process at the moment. The APS rulemaking is ongoing. We're expecting to file within the next couple weeks. So again, that's adding new eligible renewable thermal technologies to the APS.
As well as fuel cells and waste to energy thermal.
Yes. So we'll be filing within the next couple weeks. That'll likely be promulgated by late fall. The SMART rulemaking, the new solar incentive rulemaking, again, expecting to file within the next couple weeks. That will be affected not likely until next year, but all qualified projects under the SMART program will be classified as Class 1 projects. And again, another thing to keep in mind is the competitive procurement that we have through 83D and 83C. Again, they're long-term contracts. we're likely not going to see an impact as a result of those procurements until sometime in the next decade, but that will be also adding to the Class 1 supply.
Yeah, so just, I think, be aware of those proceedings, participate if you have comments, and that will all be, most of that, at least 2 rulemakings will be taking place in June and July, the comment periods. So just be aware of those.
So again, just providing you some information and links and all of our contact information. We'll pause for a brief moment to see if we have any questions in the audience at the moment that we can answer.
Checking. That's it. No questions so far? Oh, there they are. Can you make that larger so we can read them? No? Hello, it sounds like the dial-in connection is connected.
That's fine.
Oh, good.
On the SREC auction, they would be good for 2017 and 2018. If it goes to a second round, then they would also be good. A second or third round, then they would also be eligible in 2019. So first round SRECs in the auction are good for 2 future compliance years. Second and third round are good for 3 future compliance years.
And we have a question about seems to be it on questions for the moment. So we move along. When at the very end, let's remember to come back to the links and contact screen, but be reminded that this will go up at our website. Actually, it's going to go up to that first link there. So if you remember the first link, you can go there and find it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what? Okay, I was just reminded to tell people that one of the reasons my phone number is not there. Oh, sorry. Yes, I will talk to the phone instead of to the screen. Is that I'm retiring at the end of June. It's been great working with all the retail suppliers. It's always been interesting and challenging, and I really do. It really has been my pleasure to do this job since 2003 with RPS, and to be here at the Energy Office since 1984. I'm going to miss everyone. Let's move on.
So yeah, the only thing I'd say there is just when you are sending emails and questions and documents to us, please make sure to CC Kara and or Caitlin as well as Howard. Howard will be here through the end of June, but beyond that, the back and forth will have to be with us. So it would be. Don't just be communicating directly with Howard.
No, definitely not. And of course, we have the RPS address.
Yeah.
DUER.RPS@state.ma.us. That's where the filing forms go. That's where the GIS worksheets go. And anything else that's part of your filing that goes there, it doesn't come to any one of us. We all see what's there. Yep. Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Let's move on to the filing workbook. You all should have version 1.2 by now, which got issued late this morning after one of the LSEs found an error on tab N. So if you don't have, it'll say 1.2 with today's date up on the upper right. There it is. Okay. And start here by, I should mention that the places that you fill in, a lot of them are some of the information that you fill in is going to be copied to later pages through the magic of the spreadsheets. Oh, is that my company name? Thank you. Great. That's enough. Authorized rep. Put in an authorized rep. Okay, I guess I'm good enough. Actually, jump on to the next page, and there at the top of the page, in the yellow box on the top of every page, will now be the name of you, the filer. Now, this particular filer has only one. Sorry, on each of these pages, you'll see some instructions in boxes, and read those before you start filling things in. It's going to tell you about some color coding in the boxes. Some of them explain what's going on. So you've got two places. There I am talking to the screen again. You've got two places for instructions in every case. Some of them have instructions on these pages, but there are instructions in the instruction booklet. You also have some overall instructions and important things to note in the email that got sent out with the instructions. So you've got that email, you've got the 20-something page instruction document, and you've got the 16-page workbook that also includes some instructions. And the first one is that start at the beginning and work your way through, because as you enter things on each page, they will affect what pops up on later pages. And there's some spaces that will only get filled, they'll only have stuff showing up because they got listed earlier, and you won't be able to change those. If there's something there where you made a mistake, you'll have to go back to where you originally put it in. Like if you got the name of your product wrong, the number in the product, you'll have to go back to this page to get it, and then that change would be noted on the later pages. So this is particularly important. You see Caitlin entered 3 products with 3 quantities, and they total down below in table 1A. Down in 1B and 1C, this is a place for you to tell us what you did with your SRECs and your SREC 2s. You can fill this in at the beginning if you know what you're doing with all of these. You certainly know the first one. You know how many you've got. So fill that in, and then plan out where you're going with the rest. And after the first several lines, it'll tell you how much you've got that you're using for compliance and how much extras you've got to do something else with. Or how much are not for compliance of what you've got for compliance. Anyway, if during the course of the filling this out, you change your mind about how to allocate your SRECs and your SREC 2s, you can come back to this table and make corrections. But you must fill out this table before you finish and submit the workbook. Some of these things are going to show up on other pages. If you don't complete them, we're going to have to get back to you and ask you to complete them. And we'd rather not take that extra step. So get that filled out, come back to it if you need to make changes, make sure before you're done that you've finished it. So having filled that out, go on to jump ahead actually to 5. And you see that numbers from that table got filled out in here, and then some things got calculated from them. Okay, so then and you'll see that in other worksheets as well. So now we can go back to where we were. Remember, I said do them in order. So back to table 1. Where are we? Which table are we on?
We are on table 2A.
2A, okay. This one, the first set of numbers is very easy because you've got, these numbers were given to you in the load obligation worksheets that you were all sent. And you've got the totals by month to fill in here. And I guess we could have chosen some workbook to fill it in, some but we don't. So we'll just have to, any 0 months? Make it easier to have some zeros. Okay, so let's, that total from that column should really end up being the same as the total from that previous tab. What's fun? Well, anyway, after those get filled in and you get a total for the column, then you're going to, if you're one of the filers that's been around long enough to have contracts before 2013, then you're going to say how many of those June 28, 2013 contracts you had in each of those months, and how much electricity was supplied under those contracts each month. And then the last table will subtract that table, that column from that first column, and you'll get the net energy supplied under later contracts. And this was for the exemption. Part of your load, that part of your load that was under earlier contracts is going to be exempted from the solar carve-out or solar carve-out 1 obligation, and so the result in that you'll see that show up when you get to the solar carve-out table. How are we doing?
And then you have to break it up by product. Yeah. So you can see it's really just listing it by month. In that month, how many contracts you have that are qualified for this exemption, the total load supplied under those contracts, and then under Table 2B, it's which product do those contracts apply to.
And the monthly values in column F should never be greater than the monthly value in column D because they're a subset of column D.
That's right.
Right.
Yes. And then here, to the best of your ability, project forward on these earlier contracts. Put a 0 there, then you're going to obviously have a 0 in the next one.
Yeah.
And I'd rather you put the zeros in just so we don't ask ourselves, were you ignoring it? Okay. We'll know that you really meant to say 0. It wasn't a mistake. You didn't just leave it out. Okay. That instruction sounds like the old teacher in me. You want everything, children. Okay.
So this is essentially the same thing. This is just how to calculate your applicable SREC 2 exempt load. So really, this should look the same. Column D should be the same as it is on tab 2. So.
Oh, yes. Oh, so you can just copy it from one to the next. Yeah, it won't copy automatically. Hey, can we fix that?
And then if you have any contracts that were signed prior to April 25th, 2014, you include those. So
this shouldn't be lower than what was on tab 2 because it'll be at least any contract that was signed prior to June 28th, 2013 was also signed prior to April 25th, 2014.
Right.
So if anything, the amount of exempt load that applies on tab 3 should be greater than on tab 2.
Yeah.
Right.
But it should never be less than.
Yeah. These are things that we're always watching out for.
Yeah.
Like our initial glance through.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it should be the same as the previous tab. This Howard supplier does not have any more contracts between 2013 and 2014 that fall under this exemption. You may have a few more, just like Mike was saying, what you're entering on this tab for tab 3 should never be less than what you enter on tab 2.
Also note down in the middle there under table 2B, 3B, that those last two rows should have identical numbers because we're comparing the total from that column to what you have up above.
Right.
And we we have something new here. This is actually two tables that are only separated by a bold line, and this has to do with a future projection of loads that are going to be applicable under two different minimum standards depending on the contract dates.
Mm-hmm.
So do you want to explain more on that?
So it's really just columns D and E in this table are planning for the completely SREC 2 exempt load. So those are contracts signed prior to April 25th, 2014. Columns F and G in this table, this is so we can get some more information about how many contracts were signed under the bifurcated minimum standards of 2017. So there's a different minimum standard that we're applying to contracts that are signed up through May 8th, 2016, and then a different one applied to contracts signed after May 8th, 2016. We just want to know how many contracts and how much load is signed, just for planning purposes.
And it's also for market information. We will provide this information publicly, and that should help influence the pricing in the market, because you'll know how much of the load is exempt versus how much is exempt.
That sounds like a new table in the 2016 annual compliance report.
Yeah.
Although that number we may get onto our website earlier, depending on how late the report is.
So there are a couple questions. I don't know if we want to stop just quickly here, because we're on these tabs right now.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, yeah, let's stop. No, it's by the contract date. The question is, if you do have a contract signed before 4/25/14, does the entire load for that month go to column F, or only the amount of the contract go column left?
It's only the portion that was under contract.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. All right, that was all.
Yep, that's it. Good question.
Again, this is just planning purposes.
Well, that's not going to show up on a later page, but we want to see something there.
Yeah.
And this information about future projections, this is to the best of your ability. We're not going to hold you to the exact number. Everyone, it's for our understanding of the market and the future of the market, and for us sharing that with all of you after we get all the numbers in, and those numbers will all be aggregated. No one's going to know your number. No one's going to know your number on any of this, except unless you're a utility, one of the regulated utility companies.
Right.
Because your numbers are very public anyway because of utility proceedings at the DPU. Okay.
Moving on to errant certificates. So we have made some changes to this tab. Again, we hope you don't have to use this particular tab, but if you do, we're just asking that you tell us where the errant certificates are located. So on this column, just telling us what type of certificate it is. Is it settled, reserved, unsettled? So say it's reserved, say it's solar carve-out 2, obviously, and then just the number. So we'll do that.
Yeah, this is just an accounting purpose, for accounting purposes only for us. Ideally, no supplier has any errant certificates. So an errant certificate we define as a certificate that was not settled in a Massachusetts retail subaccount for compliance. So if you settled it in a different state subaccount, and now you're trying to apply it to Massachusetts, or you forgot to place it into a settled account, or you placed it into a reserved account because there wasn't enough load obligation in your subaccount to place it to put more certificates in. Those are generally the reasons that we see these types of things happen. Generally speaking, those are preventable. So if people are on top of this by June 15th and have figured everything everything out by June 15th, you should be able to avoid doing that in most cases, but we recognize that's not always how things work. So here, we're not actually asking for the documentation of the certificates themselves, but just really, if you have any of these, please just give us the quantity and the type and where it's located. If you do use this sheet, you are going to be required to provide additional backup information. We'll need copies of the GIS reports that show where these certificates are and actually document the quantity and the type and the serial numbers and all of that. But again, hopefully we don't have to deal with that.
And there was something else I was going to say. Again, these numbers, the numbers in table 4B are going to show up on the compliance tables that follow, and where there's a separate column for errant certificates that are not going to be documented like the settled certificates are. They'll be documented, but differently.
Yeah.
And we have to have them shown separately on those other tables. And the point of all of this is documentation.
Yeah. Errant certificates require manual adjustments on our end to the final data. So they are fairly time consuming and so anything that's in a settled status in your sub account, that's going to show up in your actual documentation that you provide us, the GIS settled certificate reports that you give us. This does not show up there. So if you have other certificates that are not in that report, this is where you document.
Yeah. Quick interruption. Does everyone see the screen the way we're seeing it? And if so, can we maybe we should enlarge this stuff? Use the enlargement over on the lower right. So maybe because I could barely read some of that, and this is a big screen. I'd go one more notch as long as we can see it. There, that's good. Great. On behalf of everybody out there, thank you. Let's go on. So, last one. You can see again the name of my company is up there. My products are listed there with their load obligations. There's the portion of those load obligations that becomes solar carve-out 2 obligations is showing up on a later table, and those amounts are being subtracted from the 11% figure to show the figures in column J. But I bought a bunch of certificates to meet that compliance obligation, and Caitlin's going to tell us how many certificates I got, and then we'll see what happens.
You can have, like, say you bought enough certificates to meet your entire compliance obligation this year, or if you have a combination of bank certificates from previous years, maybe you bought.
Yeah, let's put some in bank. Hardly anyone. There were very few banks from 2014 by anyone. There are a few out there. You know who you are. A lot more bank from 2015.
Right.
Cool. Did I get 600? I don't remember having 600. All right.
Or if you go over.
Now you can see column K, your banking certificates.
Yeah.
Because you've actually exceeded the requirement for that particular product.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the other thing. Most suppliers don't have multiple products. This is actually kind of an unusual filing.
Yes, it is.
But if you have multiple products, compliance is determined on a per product basis. If you only have one product, it's going to be pretty straightforward. But if you have multiple products, you actually have to meet a separate obligation for each.
And frankly, our spreadsheets, that's the one thing that our workbook does not totally account for.
It can't. Yeah, if that is happening, then it's sometimes.
But we see it. If we see any issues with any of them, we'll deal with it. Okay.
Great.
So as you fill things in the white boxes, the stuff in the green boxes change, and you end up finding out how much if any ACP you're going to owe, and how much surplus you might have, and you'll find out whether you've overdone it on surplus, and you can't bank it all forward.
And I think most of you probably are pretty well aware of this, but the Class 1 market is very oversupplied right now. I think we don't anticipate receiving any or very little alternative compliance payments for Class 1. should be plenty of certificates available for you to purchase and bank if you so choose to. So
Yeah, the only ACP we'll see might be from a very small supplier, maybe started at the end of the year and figures it's not worth the effort to go purchasing a very small amount of certificates. But there's so much there, I don't think we'll have the issue of any supplier buying a lot more than it needs and leaving others short. Because they're limited in how much they can bank anyway.
So that's the Class 1 table. And again, this is Class 1 non-solar carve-out certificates. We're moving on to the solar carve-out tables in the next couple tabs.
Oh, oops. Overshot a little.
Overshot a little.
Okay, so let's see. How many SRECs did I buy? I don't remember.
Yeah.
What was that?
This is basically the same as the last table. I think really the only difference to note here is that there's a bifurcation. So you see that there are actually two different minimum standards in columns L and M based on the amount of load that you entered into the exempt tabs earlier on tab 2 or table 2.
As you can see in this column here.
And the other thing to note is in row 23 there, you'll see there's a blue box that says SRECs for solar carve-out. That comes from the preliminary tab from table 1, where you identified how many SRECs you're actually presenting for compliance. So the number in the green above should equal that number in the blue, because that's a documentation of how many certificates you actually are providing for compliance purposes.
But if you end up not putting that number in, you're going to see a difference, and you'll have to ask yourself why. But
yeah,
that was the point I was making before.
All right.
So again, very similar to the previous tab for the solar carve-out 2 minimum standards and compliance obligation. Again, it brings forward the same amount of load that you filled out in the previous tables. So that load is exempt. So that is subtracted from the total amount that you are actually providing.
The only difference between this and the last table is that there's not two columns with two different minimum standards.
Right.
Because the minimum standard for anything in column D is 0.
Right, that was the exempt load. That's why I call it exempt. Whereas the previous one, it was a bifurcation of the minimum standard depending on contract date. Okay, the other difference in this table is you'll see column H is grayed out because 2014 there were not any SREC 2s yet.
No, there were, but there were no banked.
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, last year it was grayed out because the year before that it was done. All right. Okay, and don't forget, if you got any of those SREC 2s from auction as reminted SRECs and you're using them here, they're going to be part of that number in column F. You're not going to call them banked. That's all. And when they're documented, we can see the difference on the certificate record we get from the GIS. You send us from the GIS, we can tell they are coded those reminted SREC 2s are coded differently there in the documentation. Where are we? Class 2. This is a class that continues to be undersupplied, unfortunately, and I'm sure, like everyone else, I couldn't find enough. I couldn't find enough Class 2 RECs to meet my obligation, so I'm going to have ACP to pay. Fortunately, the ACP rate is a lot lower on this than it is for Class 1. Class 1, what is it? 60-something? $67, and for this it's in the 20s per megawatt hour short. So 2,905 Class 2 megawatt hours of ACP credits that I'm going to have to pay for, and you'll see that show up on the ACP table later on. It'll copy that number. Okay, and obviously nothing to bank. Okay. One other thing worth noting on the previous table, which we will not go back to, and this one, is there's an extra pair of columns that are all grayed out, columns D and E. Those apply to only one. Column D applies to only one supplier. It has to do with contracts that predated 2009. There's only one company out there that has any of those left, and this is the last year. 2016 was the last year that they've got any of those. And because of that, we have to be able to exempt its load under that contract from the Class 2 obligations. And so we've automatically put a 0 in for everybody, except that filer will be getting a separate workbook that has an extra table in it, and the number from that table is going to show up in that box where you see the 0 at the bottom of column D. Don't worry about it. And that company knows who they are, not me.
One thing on this, banking was not allowed per our regulations in 2014 and 2015, so there are no bank certificates available for the waste to energy class. However, this year, banking resumes, but only at 5%. So it's a small, you can bank, but you can only bank a small percentage of your compliance obligation.
Yeah, we used to have from year to year, we were carrying a very large quantity of banked WEX, and we got rid of it through that 2-year hiatus, and we don't want to see it happening again. It was unduly distorting the market.
The market is designed to be in equilibrium with itself, so supply and demand are relatively equal to one another, and that surplus that was created in those first few years would not have otherwise gone away. We
never would have gone away, and that kept prices artificially low. And of course, no market is perfect, so we will continue having surplus here, shortage there over the years. Anyway, so there we are. Now on to APS. It's also covered by that exemption. You see the 0 at the bottom of column D. And so how many 8s did I buy? Well, the APS supply has also been short. That may change in the future when APS expands to include renewable thermal and its qualified technologies. We shall see. Do I have any green products? No. Good. If you got green products and you haven't done this before, phone.
Yeah.
Let's push on. This is a difficult table.
The green, just to be clear, the green products we're talking about are specifically Class 1 renewable green products. We don't care about non-Class 1 green products. So only if you are buying Class 1 RECs above and beyond your compliance obligation requirements do you need to fill out anything on this table.
Well, that's if you've got a product that claims to be 100%, claims to be 50% green, and you don't specifically say that they're all Class 1 qualified, but they are qualified as renewables. Some of them might not have Massachusetts RECs. It might be, for example, from some hydro that's too low. Well,
we don't want that information.
Okay.
It says it right there. Our Class 1.
Oh, all right, fine, thank you. But it is. I'm just saying for your own internal purposes. Don't think that your green product. As far as, say, legal obligations to do what you advertise, truth in advertising, which we do not, which is the AG's office to enforce. What you're not necessarily promising Class 1 RECs. If you are, then you're gonna have to put your extra RECs into reserve, I think, because you won't have enough room. As far as load obligation is concerned. Anyway, let's go on. If you have questions about that phone, so that one I'd say phone me or Mike. Ooh, okay. Here's the table that automatically calculates what ABC retail supply owes to the Mass to the DOER account at the Mass CEC. And as you can see, I owe that. I owe that much in SREC shortage. Okay, well, I guess I'm not going to be able to retire. It's going to take me the rest of my life doing that. All right, well, there it is. It calculates that stuff automatically for you. You can't change anything on this table. These are locked up. So, going on, you can see the company name and my name have appeared here, and this is where I sign to say that all this stuff is true and honest, and I haven't double counted here or anywhere else with these certificates that I've used. This will have to be printed out in order for me to sign it. Why does it say filing 16 on it? Ignore it. And then the next page is for somebody else to sign. The chairman of the board of my company is going to say that he has qualified me to sign that filing, and so his name's going to go underneath, and he's going to sign this, and he's going to, in that box there, he's going to say, well, the board of directors authorized Howard to sign for ABC. And I'm the chairman of the board, or I'm the clerk of the board, the secretary of the corporation, or I'm one of the principals of I'm one of the owners of the LLC, or whatever's appropriate. Put something in there. In some cases, it'll be the authorized rep signing for himself if he happens to be the lead. If he happens to be one of the owners of the LLC, he may have that authority. But he should put something in there. Moving on to the new tab N at the end. This includes instructions for submitting your ACP to the Mass Clean Energy Center, where it lives in a DOER account, an account on our behalf, and funds are spent there under our instructions, and we have a memorandum of understanding between the agencies, which is between us and that quasi-public entity, the CEC, about the expenditures of those funds. So it's our funds, and they get spent in ways that are specified, that are limited by the regulations. The wiring instructions are down below there. Up above, on the off chance that you're using somebody else as the contact for purposes of the ACP, you put all that information in there, but you might just be copying stuff from that very first tab in the workbook. We didn't want to assume that you were, so we'll let you fill that in yourself. And sometimes the CEC has gotten the wire transfers from some entity that does not match the name of any retail supplier, and they say, huh? Who does this belong to? And that's that last box under supplier name, other names, if any, used for ACP transfer. So if the funds are actually coming from some entity with a different name, put it there, please, so the Mass CEC folks know what to do with it. And that's it for the forms.
Okay.
Wow.
See if we have any other questions.
See if we have questions, and just a reminder, if you find any more mistakes, please find them as soon as possible. Let us know as soon as possible, and so we can share so we can make any corrections that are needed. I hope there won't be any, but everyone can find out.
So the first question is, so to be clear, we do not need to report green products if the product is not for Class 1 RECs. That's correct. I mean, if you're not procuring any Class 1 RECs as part of the green product offering, you do not need to report it.
Other questions?
Yeah, anything else?
No. We have email addresses. And if you find anything that's not clear, if come up with other questions that don't seem to be answered, or if you think you find an answer, but it's not clear, just let us know. Could you restate who is able to sign the notary section? Well, the notary public, of course, signs below, but the person who signs above, saying, I authorized Howard to sign for ABC, that depends on the kind of entity you have. It's typically one of the high, one of the president or vice presidents or chairman of the board, officer of the corporation, clerk or secretary of the corporation.
Someone with sufficient authority to designate someone to sign on the company's behalf.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I don't think we have a specific limitation on that because there's a lot of possibilities. Yes. But we really want to make sure that the person who's doing it is someone that is, the person who's saying that this person can submit it is someone who's authorized to bind the company accordingly. I mean, because this is a pretty significant requirement for the company.
Yeah. Unlike RPS statements of qualification application for a generator, we do have rules about who can sign there, but don't have those same rules here. Whatever you regard as appropriate, and if we don't worry about whether we're going to like it or not. If we don't like it, we'll let you know.
So
it rarely has happened.
The next question is it generally looked down upon if an entity has to pay ACP? And I think no. The answer is no.
Absolutely not.
No. I think alternative compliance payment is a means of meeting compliance. Generally speaking, if there are RECs available in the market, we encourage people to go out and try to find them because I think there's no environmental attributes associated with an alternative compliance payment, and we prefer not to collect them if we can avoid that. But I think it's definitely not looked down upon the company. We don't look down upon the company, but if they're making alternative compliance payments versus procuring certificates.
Yeah. Sometimes we hear of it termed a penalty. We do not regard it as a penalty. We knew at the beginning of RPS that there were not going to be enough certificates for everyone to comply, especially in the first year. And it's an alternative compliance payment. It's an alternative. Okay? And they're, like the one company that was new in the last fall, in the fall of 2016, and ended up with a total of just under 1 megawatt hour of load. To go out and look for one of each type of certificate is just, what kind of expenditure of time and effort is that? So we expect them to use mainly to use ACP. It doesn't, or if you're looking for class two RECs, you're just not going to find enough. You're going to have to use ACP. So it's not a penalty. It's just an alternative, so that everyone can comply.
The next question here is it possible to better understand where exactly ACP payments are used by Mass Clean Energy Center, and then specifically for waste to energy? So for ACP payments, we do have alternative compliance payment spending plans that we have historically posted. We haven't posted one for a while. There was a bit of a restructuring of all of the funds and kind of repurposing of things. Those are on our website, posted with our annual compliance reports. As far as more recent funding, a lot of that has gone to programs that are jointly managed by DOER, Mass Clean Energy Center, some of our sister agencies, some money, just a couple examples of programs. We've given money to the Department of Agricultural Resources to fund renewable energy projects at farms in the state. Mm-hmm. Right. We've given money to the Department of Environmental Protection to fund projects at wastewater facilities and water treatment facilities.
Those were for energy efficiency or
so generally speaking, we're trying to either reduce load or increase the supply of resources so that we're reducing future reliance on alternative compliance payments. And then as far as waste to energy is concerned, we actually get very little class 2 waste to energy payments. I think we've never received any more than $150,000 in a single year of alternative compliance payments. Those have gone to a variety of different small programs. They're kind of lumped in often with other larger initiatives. Some of them have been used to fund studies and other things. So we actually don't get a lot of money from that particular class.
Right. Class two ACP funds are used to support. I'm reading from the draft annual report for 2015. We use Class 2 ACP funds to support or promote the development of renewable and other clean energy, including, among other things, local and state level clean energy projects and activities of DOER's Green Communities Division.
Yeah.
In the case of Class 1, including the solar carve-out, the regulations specify that they must further the commercial development of RPS Class 1 renewable generation units and solar carve-out renewable generation units. And ACP funds must further the commercial development of alternative generation.
Yeah,
those are some quotes from the regs, except for Class 2, which is a little more open.
Class 2 is a little more broad. If you want to see a flavor of some of that, I'd recommend checking out those annual spending reports, and we can give you examples of other programs too that we've funded.
Yeah. Those are on the same page. You'll find those on the same web page as past year's annual compliance reports. Yeah. And we hope that the 2015 reports will be released soon.
So there's another question here. Can you please go over the auction again? If it goes to the third round, is the obligation double? So the way that the auction interacts with the compliance formula for SRECs is the compliance formula is supply reactive. So the more supply that's coming into the market, the faster the pace it grows at. In the SREC 1 program, we're sort of entering a stage of equilibrium where the market supply is roughly going to be equal to market demand. We don't expect to be holding large auctions or collecting large amounts of ACP funds, but we'll probably collect a mixture of both each year. And in the SREC 2 market, that market's still growing, but it will be kind of leveling off probably sometime next year, the year after that. So the way that it works is we estimate supply that's coming into the market. We actually look at actual supply that's in the market. We estimate supply that's coming into the market, and then that's the kind of basis for most of the compliance obligation. But any SRECs that are deposited into that auction account represent oversupply. So what we do is we increase the demand the following year by a corresponding amount. So if there's 100,000 SRECs deposited into that auction account, the demand increases by an additional 100,000 SRECs the following year to absorb that oversupply. However, if it gets to the third round, that doubles. So it increases by 200,000 megawatt hours. And that's really designed as I refer to them as sort of carrots and sticks in a sense, because the carrots being you have the ability to use these SRECs for future compliance. They are tradable certificates. So unlike a bank certificate, which is locked into just your own personal account at DOER, this is something that you can move around, resell, potentially make money off of. And so you get that extra flexibility of how you use the SRECs in future years. However, if it does go to that third round, then you see a significant increase in the demand, which could actually outpace the ability for supply to keep up. And that happened in the SREC 1 market a few years ago, where it went to the third round. There were 130,000 or so SRECs deposited, and the demand increase was about 260,000 megawatt hours, I believe, if I'm remembering this correctly. And it wasn't an issue the following year, but the year after that, we actually saw SREC prices go back up above the auction price because it didn't clear. So you saw prices in the SREC 1 market go significantly above the auction price because of that doubling effect. So to avoid that happening, we recommend purchasing these in the first or second round, and we're happy to answer any of the further questions people might have about that.
Anything else? Now, what's the recording status of this, Charlie? The whole thing is recorded, including our voices and everything are recorded?
Yes, the voices and the video is recorded.
Mm-hmm.
We can post that in a couple of days.
Right, and that'll be at the same place that if you go to the site, go to our homepage and go to compliance for retail electricity suppliers or something like that. And then under that, you'll find a page for the compliance workbook and instructions. And on that page, you'll find the latest version of the workbook. The instructions that were sent end of last week. The email that went out with the instructions, since that too contained instructions. A copy of this, the webinar slides, and within a couple of days, the recording of this session, right? Okay. Any other questions? Again, if you happen to find, I hope no one finds any more errors, but if you do, we really need to know about them. Thank you all for your attention, your participation. Look forward to helping you, and look forward to seeing those compliance filings coming in. Thank you very much for attending. Have a great summer, and don't forget to get in touch if you got questions. And if they're of general interest, we can share them. If there's a specific to your filing, we'll work with you. Our goal is to get the filings all in, get them all good. Get them in on time. Thanks, and have a great summer. And I'm hanging up.